One day, two friends, Alexei and Dmitri, decided to go on vacation to the mountains. They loved nature and adventure, so they chose the most remote and picturesque corner, where few people had ever been. They rented a small house at the foot of the mountain and planned to walk different routes every day, enjoying the views and fresh air. On the first day, they followed the path that led to the waterfall. On the way, they met a local resident who warned them not to climb too high into the mountains, because there are evil harpies, half humans, half birds who kidnap and eat people. Alexei and Dmitri smiled and thanked him for his advice, but did not take him seriously. They thought it was just superstitions and legends that spread among the locals. They reached the waterfall and were delighted by its beauty. They took some photos and decided to relax on the bank of the river, which flowed from under the waterfall. They settled down on the soft grass and closed their eyes, listening to the sound of water and the singing of birds. They felt happy and calm, but their peace did not last long. Suddenly, they heard a sharp scream that pierced the air. They opened their eyes and saw above them three terrifying creatures that resembled women with wings, claws, and beaks. These were the harpies that a local resident had warned them about. They circled above them, making ominous noises and preparing to attack. Alexei and Dmitri were terrified. They realized that they were trapped and could not escape. They grabbed their backpacks and tried to fend off the harpies by throwing rocks and branches at them, but it didn't help. The harpies were too fast and strong. One of them grabbed Alexei by the shoulder with her claws and lifted him into the air. Alexei screamed in pain and fear. Dmitri tried to save him, but another harpy hit him on the head with its beak, and he fell to the ground, losing consciousness. The harpies took Alexei to their nest, which was located on the top of the mountain. There they were going to tear him apart and eat him. Alexei understood that he had nothing to defend himself with and no one to help. He prayed that this was just a nightmare from which he would soon wake up. But this was reality, and he faced death. When Dmitri regained consciousness, he felt a severe pain in his head. He remembered what had happened, and realized in horror that his friend Alexei had been kidnapped by harpies. He couldn't believe that it was true, and that he was left alone in this wilderness. He got to his feet and looked around. He didn't see a soul, just the river, the waterfall, and the mountains. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't leave his friend to his fate, but he also couldn't fight the harpies alone. He needed help. He decided to go back to the cabin they rented and try to find someone who could help him. He took his backpack and hurried along the trail, hoping that the harpies would not return. He ran as fast as he could, ignoring the fatigue and pain. He was only thinking about his friend and what might have happened to him. On the way, he met the same local who had warned them about the harpies. He saw that Dmitri was panicking and covered in blood. He asked him what had happened, and Dmitri told him everything. A local resident was shocked and sympathized with him. He said that he knew where the harpy nest was and that he could show him the way. But he also said that it was very dangerous, and that they would not be able to deal with the harpies without weapons and reinforcements. He invited Dmitri to go with him to the village where he lived and asked for help from other residents. He said that they had guns and bows, and that they were not afraid of harpies. He said that they were ready to help Dmitri if he would pay them for it. Dmitri agreed. He was willing to do anything to save his friend. He thanked the local for his kindness and followed him. They walked for about an hour until they reached the village. There they met with other residents who listened to their story. They said they would help Dmitri, but only for a certain amount. Dmitri agreed to pay them everything he had. He took out the money he was going to spend on vacation from his backpack and gave it to them. The residents were pleased and said they were ready to hit the road. They took their weapons and equipment and gathered together. There were 10 of them, including Dmitri and the local resident who led them. They left the village and headed towards the mountains. They walked quickly and carefully, trying not to attract the attention of the harpies. They knew that they didn't have much time, and that they had to act decisively and boldly. They hoped that Alexei was still alive, and that they would be able to save him. They walked for about 2 hours until they reached the foot of the mountain where the harpy nest was located. They saw harpies flying out from behind the peak and returning, carrying the torn bodies of animals and people in their paws. They heard their shrill screams and felt their anger and hunger. They understood that they were entering into a deadly battle, and that they had only one chance of success. They decided to split into 2 groups. One group, which included Dmitri, had to climb the mountain and make their way to the harpy nest, while another group distracted their attention by shooting at them with guns and bows. They hoped that in this way they would be able to enter the nest, find Alexei, and get him out of there. They agreed on their plan and prepared for action. Dmitri and his group began to climb the steep slope, trying not to make noise and not to show themselves to the harpies. They were armed with knives and stones, which they could use as a last resort. They knew that they couldn't fight the harpies in the air, and that they needed to get to the nest as quickly as possible. They were following a local resident who knew the path that led to the nest. At that time, another group opened fire on the harpies that were circling above them. They tried to hit them, but it wasn't that easy. The harpies were very agile and dodged bullets and arrows. They also counterattacked, pouncing on the shooters and clawing at them with their claws. They were fierce and relentless. They wanted to protect their nest and their prey. They did not give the shooters a break and inflicted severe wounds on them. The battle was fierce and bloody. There were losses on both sides. Some of the shooters fell dead, struck by the beaks and claws of the harpies. Some harpies fell to the ground, pierced by bullets and arrows, but neither side gave up. They continued to fight without noticing anything around them. Dmitri and his group climbed higher and higher until they reached the top of the mountain. There they saw a huge nest made of twigs, bones, and rags. There were dozens of harpies lying in it, sleeping or pecking at their prey. Among them, Dmitri noticed his friend Alexei, who was tied up and injured. He was pale and exhausted, but still alive. Dmitri felt relief and joy. He had found his friend, and now he had to save him. He signaled to his companions to creep up to the nest as quietly as possible. They were prepared for the harpies to wake up and attack them. They were determined and brave. They knew this was their last chance. They approached the nest and began to untie Alexei. He saw Dmitri and smiled faintly. He couldn't believe that his friend had come for him. He was grateful and happy, but their joy was short-lived. One of the harpies, who was closer to them, sensed their presence and opened her eyes. She saw that people were trying to steal her food and let out a loud scream. She climbed onto the wings and rushed at them. The other harpies also woke up and joined the attack. They were furious and cruel. They wanted to kill and eat the intruders. Dmitri and his group realized that they had fallen into a trap. They couldn't escape because the harpies had surrounded them. They couldn't fight because they didn't have weapons. They could only defend themselves with their knives and stones, but it was useless. They were desperate and hopeless. They thought it was the end of them. But suddenly they heard a familiar sound. These were shots from rifles and bows. They looked down and saw that another group that had been distracting the harpies had come up to help them. They saw them shooting at the harpies that attacked them. They saw some harpies falling from the sky, injured or killed. They saw the other harpies retreating, scared and wounded. They saw how the way to salvation was opening up for them. They felt hope and strength. They realized that they were not alone, and that they had a chance to survive. They took advantage of the moment and rushed to the exit of the nest. They were carrying Alexei, who was very weak. They went down the slope and met another group that was waiting for them. They hugged and congratulated each other. They did it. They defeated the harpies and saved Alexei. They quickly left the mountain before the harpies came to their senses. They returned to the village, where they received medical care and rest. They told their story to the residents, who were delighted with their courage and friendship. They thanked them for their help and gave them some of their belongings that they couldn't take with them. They said goodbye to them and promised not to forget them. They got into the car they rented and drove to the airport. They decided that they had had enough adventures this time, and that they wanted to return home. They were tired, but happy. They were happy that they had survived and that they had kept their friendship. They were proud of themselves and each other. They were real heroes.